Yesterday, we covered outward distractions, saying that our sensory faculties shouldn't get engrossed in external objects because we won't take in the meaning of Dharma. Ordinary people tend to get distracted by external changes, but Mahayanists, especially those who have learned the right conduct while listening to teachings, should discipline their minds with mindfulness and vigilance when attending a Dharma class or engaging in practice. This is essential. Now let's move to the fifth of the 6 stains. When listening to and practicing the Dharma, make sure you do not focus too intently. Some people overfocus. They hold on to one specific teaching and insist on grasping it or succeeding in its corresponding practice. For example, when practicing techniques that work with channels, winds, and drops, some practitioners focus so tightly that the body becomes unwell and the mind unease, which eventually leads to various obstacles to practice. When listening to teachings, if you focus only on individual words and phrases, you may only remember one detail instead of the whole. This is like the Dremo bear that Patrul Rinpoche mentioned in the text. The Dremo bear appears often in Tibetan folk stories. It likes to dig holes in the ground and sleep in them. It often fights with or even kills its foes. Especially in winter, when digging holes, the bear sometimes digs out a hibernating marmot. The bear is irritated when it sees that the marmot and its family are sleeping, so the bear digs out one marmot, punches it, and puts the marmot under its butt. Then the bear digs out another marmot and repeats the procedure. Meanwhile, the first marmot has awakened, so when the bear goes for the next marmot, the first one runs away. As a result, no matter how many marmots the bear digs out, he ends up having only one with him. There is a similar Chinese story of the black bear picking ears of corn. In this case, a black bear picks one ear of corn and puts it under its arm. When the bear reaches out for another ear of corn, the first one drops on the ground. Thus, after working hard for a long time, in the end, the black bear only has one ear of corn in its paw. This is very similar to the story of the Dremo bear. This is quite foolish. When some people practice, they only focus on one point, leaving other aspects aside. By doing so, they cannot take in the whole. Or when listening to Dharma teachings, some people only focus on one item instead of the whole. For example, when a Buddhist story is brought up in the teaching, they remember the story, but when the teaching continues, they forget the story and remember only the new detail. When the class is eventually over, all they remember is the last part of the teachings, and they forget the earlier teachings. It is very important to adjust the state of our minds. If you are unable to grasp the basic Dharma teachings, you'd better devote more time to learning the right conduct while listening to teachings. For example, you need to understand the following aspects: how to take notes on the master's teaching, how to read the text, and after reading the text, how to integrate your own understanding with the meaning of the text and the master's teachings, etc. When attending a Dharma class, some people just listen without referring to any text, so they don't even know what the teaching is about. Some people neither read the text nor focus on the teaching. Instead, they just sit in class mindlessly. Even worse, some people remain in the 7-point posture and start to practice tummo, a tantric practice of yogic heat, when they are supposed to be listening to teachings. These are quite inappropriate behaviors in a Dharma class. All these arise because Dharma students don't know the right attitude and conduct for listening to teachings. The appropriate behavior is to follow the text and reflect on the content at the same time while listening to teachings. Khenpo Kiwang once taught us you should train yourself on the methods for a while. Otherwise, you don't even know how to listen to teachings properly. Indeed, some novice monastics and householders think Dharma teachings are just like worldly teachings. They don't know that the two teachings differ significantly in style and format. it takes time for them to adapt to Dharma teachings. Many of you lay practitioners are motivated in attending Dharma teachings, yet you should also pay attention to the right conduct while listening to teachings. For example, how can you avoid the 3 defects of the pot? How can you get rid of the 6 stains? You should think carefully about these issues. If listened to correctly, the teachings will naturally merge into your minds. When listening to teachings, if you focus too intensely, then each time you grasp one point, you forget the one before and never understand the whole. Meanwhile, too much concentration also makes you sleepy. As said in Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, wildness and remorse, and hateful thoughts, and dullness, somnolence, and yearning lust, and doubt are hindrances. Please know these 5 musmals are thieves that steal the gem of virtuous deeds. Feeling sleepy or dullness, somnolence is a thief that steals the gem of virtuous deeds. Therefore, inward tension, like outward distraction, is a big hindrance in our practice. After years of study and practice, many eminent masters know what the hindrances in their practice are, so they can maintain a balance between being too strict and loose. In comparison, some practitioners are excessively diligent at the outset. They neglect sleep and food, practice day and night, sleep only 3 to 4 hours a day, and disregard others who try to persuade them that such a lifestyle could harm their health. However, after a while, these same practitioners become too loose and slack. They are awake for only 3 or 4 hours a day and spend the rest of the day sleeping. They oscillate between 2 opposite extremes, which is not beneficial. A few days ago, when I taught the Longchen Nyingtik meditation instructions, I mentioned that Dharma practice is a lifelong endeavor, not a temporary passion lasting only a few days or months. Some practitioners are too hasty, thinking, I haven't encountered the Dharma in all these years. Now that I am fortunate enough to finally encounter it, I must gain experience or, better yet, achieve realization as soon as possible. Well, that is unrealistic. Dharma practice is a long-term project. It is impossible to earn a worldly college degree in 2 or 3 days, let alone attain transcendental liberation. So please, make sure you understand this very well. When you are too loose, discipline yourself to stop slacking off and put all your possible time slots into practice. When you practice tightly, stop focusing too intently, stay carefree, and avoid being hasty, otherwise your practice might go astray. There are many stories in the sutras about how to balance between tight and loose. For example, the Samyukta Agama, the Connected Discourses, and Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra, the great treatise on the perfection of wisdom, include the following story about Srona. Srona received ordination from Katyayana, Mahatyayana. A year later, Srona visited the Buddha and asked for permission to receive upasampada in the presence of just 5 bhikkhus, instead of the 10 bhikkhus that Katyayana would have needed 3 years to gather. After meeting the Buddha, Srona started to practice kinhin, or walking meditation, whenever possible. Srona had fine hair and tender skin on the soles of his feet, so he bled often while walking. Because of the bleeding, the Buddha granted special permission for Srona to wear shoes with a 1-layer sole. However, Srona declined, saying, I left behind 80 chariots made of gold and 7 elephant carriages filled with servants when I renounced my life as a householder and became a monastic. How can I now become attached to shoes? Srona continued to practice diligently with the Buddha, yet he still couldn't attain realization, and his devotion to the Dharma began to waver. Srona thought, I come from a wealthy family. I can always give up my bhikkhu precepts, disrobe, and return home as a householder. Then I can enjoy my wealth, make frequent offerings, and support the Sangha. This will also be considered practice. Knowing Srona had been so urgent to attain realization that he had become too tight, the Buddha sent someone to bring Srona over when Srona's thoughts arose. The Buddha asked, when you were a householder, were you good at playing veena? Srona answered, yes, I played very well. Did your vina sound best when the strings were very tight? No, it didn't. Did your vina sound best when the strings were very loose? No, it didn't. The Buddha then asked, did it sound best when the strings were neither too tight nor too loose? Shrona answered, yes. The Buddha told him, it is the same with your practice. When too tight, your practice brings wildness and remorse. When too loose, it becomes too slack. Thus, you should practice with a balance between tight and loose. That is, you should have neither inward tension nor outward distraction. Upon hearing the Buddha's advice, Shrona prostrated with great bliss and left. By practicing properly, soon Shrona attained arhathood. The Shrona story, in the words of my perfect teacher, is very similar to the one described above. Once in the past, Ananda was teaching Shrona how to meditate. Shrona encountered great difficulty in getting it right. Sometimes he was too tense, while other times he was too relaxed, thus preventing him from attaining a meditative state. Shrona discussed the matter with the Buddha, and they had a conversation about playing the vina, as described above. In the end, the Buddha said, it is the same for training your mind. Being neither too tight nor too loose is very important. Beginning Buddhists tend to be too tight, myself included. I was very young when I first studied the Dharma, so I didn't have inward tension. But when I first became a monk, I was quite judgmental. For example, when I saw that some old lama's behaviors didn't strictly follow the precepts, I thought, what kind of monks they are. Now that I'm a monk myself, I must follow the precepts 100% and behave appropriately. Those monks received their ordinations so many years ago. How can they still talk and act in this way? I had many such judgmental thoughts at that time. I paid a lot of attention to my manners and was proud of my own image, which, as I reflect now, was actually quite superficial. Some householders are like this as well. After studying the Dharma for a short time, they start to judge this or criticize that. They even scold the guru, saying, you should do this or that, Buddhists should be like this or that. They are quite self-righteous. Such people tend to be very diligent and devoted at the beginning, but then gradually they regress. In the end, they don't even bother to read Dharma texts, and much of their conduct is inappropriate. Therefore, every one of us should pay attention to this issue. Shrona followed the Buddha's advice and steadily practiced with a balance between tight and loose for years, and eventually attained fruition. Those who have reached higher levels of realization tend to practice in this manner. They continue to practice this way for 10 or 20 years. Significant progress can only be made after long-term steady practice, rarely after only a short period of time. You can also find the story in the Sutra of 42 chapters. The storyline is very similar. In the end, the Buddha said, it is the same when a shramana, ascetic, is practicing the way. If his mind is properly tuned, he will attain the way. If he pursues the way too impetuously, his body will be weary. If his body is weary, his mind will be vexed. If vexations arise, his practice will regress. If his practice regresses, his faults will increase. However, if he remains pure, serene, and joyful, he will not lose the way. Therefore, this sutra well elaborates the importance of the balance between tight and loose. If possible, you should check texts such as the Connected Discourses and the Great Treatise on the Perfection of Wisdom for instructions on adjusting the mind, and carefully contemplate those instructions. Worldly people also promote the balance between tight and loose and support an equilibrium between hard work and relaxation. It says in the Book of Rites, the principle of kings Wen and Wu was to alternate tension with relaxation. Tension refers to pulling the bowstring, and relaxation to letting go the string. This means alternating between tension and relaxation was the effective way for kings Wen and Wu to govern the country. Therefore, whatever you do, you should follow a specific pith guidance. Take the example of a CEO managing a corporation. or an abbot overseeing a monastery. If the person is too strict, handling everything absolutely in accordance with the rules, then employees or monastic members might leave due to the rigidity. In contrast, if the person is too loose, setting no rules, so the organization becomes disorganized and messy, then no one wants to stay. This is an area where I really admired Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, because he not only practiced in a balanced manner, but also managed Larungar Buddhist Academy with modern management skills. When you are a manager, be it in a Buddhist center or a worldly organization, you should keep a balance. If you are too fierce, people may consider you a Mara, which is not good. If you are too soft, people may not treat you seriously, which is also not good. As a manager, you should follow Mipham Rinpoche's advice in The Just King. Everyone praises someone who has the strength to act peacefully or wrathfully as appropriate to the situation. To be gentle with those who despise them, even if they're enemies. To be harsh with those who run away, even if they're friends. Thus, you should be both wrathful and peaceful. Regardless of the inner state of your mind, if you adjust your outer behavior according to this advice, you can easily get things done. This also applies to your practice. You should not be too loose. Otherwise, you may end up indulging yourself every day and living an undirected and pitiful life. You should not be too tight either. Although some people practice very diligently, which is good, it is hard to say whether they can remain in this state in the long run. There was once a monk at Larungar who appeared very devoted at the beginning. Once when he visited me at my cabin, he started to do long prostrations 50 meters away from my yard. I told him several times not to prostrate, but he insisted. His head was bleeding due to the prostrations. He said with great determination, "I follow you from today. I will completely devote myself to your Dharma activities. I vow to become your best disciple." I felt he was a bit too much, which is not necessarily good, but because he was tech-savvy, I assigned quite a few tasks to him. It turned out that he became too relaxed later, maybe because of his weariness or some other reasons. He became very different from before. So, when a person appears very diligent and devoted at the beginning, even if he cries or makes a scene, I dare not fully believe his commitments. This is because I don't know whether he will persist and still be this diligent in the long run. Even worldly work, life, and relationship require long-term examination. Recently, a fellow villager told me a story. A family married their daughter to the son of another family. The two families-in-law were on great terms at the very beginning of the marriage. Initially, they all lived in their own separate tents, but because they became so close to each other, during the Tibetan New Year, the two families decided to merge their tents into one. Living in the same tent, they shared everything. However, the harmony didn't last long. A few months later, many conflicts arose, so they were not happy together anymore. It was pretty sad. Many seniors had predicted what would happen between the two families, saying, "These two families are too close to each other this year. Therefore, next year something unpleasant may happen." It is the same with listening to teachings and practicing the Dharma. When a person goes too far, either too slack or too diligent, senior practitioners will know his practice definitely won't go right. Dakini Machik Labdron, 1055 to 1149, said, "Neither too tight nor too loose." This is an essential point for the view. Machik Labdron was a well-known Dakini, or sky dancer, on the Tibetan plateau. She attained realization through the scriptures on Prajnaparamita, the perfection of transcendent wisdom, and later followed the Indian sage Padamapasanghi. She established the lineage of Chaud based on the Prajnaparamita Sutras, which is still often practiced among Tibetan Buddhists from various schools. She also placed many termas, or hidden treasures, in sacred mountains, some of which were revealed by eminent masters of later generations. There are varied descriptions of her birth and death years. Some say she was born in 1103 and died in 1204. Others say she was born in 1031. Nevertheless, with her compassion and realization of emptiness, she accepted innumerable beings. Through integrating body offerings with compassion and emptiness, she subdued many nagas, ghosts, and spirits. As a great and accomplished master, she advised practitioners of later generations not to let the mind get too loosely relaxed or too inwardly concentrated. If too tense, the practice may go astray. For example, some retreatants overly focus on the practice and become a bit unhealthy both physically and mentally. When a retreat is over, their eyes are red, hair is very long, and they appear scary to others. If they're too relaxed, it's like when practitioners skip out of retreat and choose to have fun in the cities. They put the law of karma on the back burner, and everything, like empty space, does not seem to exist anymore. There are many such practitioners. Therefore, do not let your mind get too tense or too inwardly concentrated. Allow your senses to be naturally at ease, remaining in a balanced state between tension and relaxation. This is a very profound key to our practice. Sarahapa says, the mind is liberated when the constraints are untied. However, many people are very constrained by their longing for liberation. They say, Guru, can you beat me with a stick? I really want to attain realization. I haven't had the chance to study Dharma in the past 20-something years. Now that I have finally started to listen to teachings, I realize I have missed so much. There are so many sutras and shastras I haven't studied. There are so many states of realization I haven't experienced. I feel I am in a great hurry to catch up. I must attain divine vision right away. Such practitioners may even try to hit their heads on the wall, wishing a divine vision will appear. This is also very unrealistic. Practice takes time. Beginning practitioners shouldn't be hasty. It is indeed very nice that you now meet the Dharma, but make sure you advance step by step, just as you eat food bite by bite. By doing so, the states of practice will arise in your mind one by one. Dharma practice requires long-term persistence. Many great masters in the Tibet regions and the Han areas of China practice with perseverance and consistency for 10 or 20 years. It shouldn't be that you are diligent only when the Guru bestows empowerment, when you listen to teachings once or twice, or when you read 1 or 2 books. Such diligence can hardly help you attain liberation right away. You have to set a long-term plan. Only in such a way can you succeed in your practice. In summary, do not let your mind get too tense or too inwardly concentrated. Let your senses be naturally at ease, balanced between tension and relaxation. Of course, some people are good at relaxation, as Mipham Rinpoche says in his Beacon of Certainty. If some idiots think, since there is no modal apprehension, from the very beginning one should relax and not grasp anything, then because all beings are quite relaxed in their ordinary state, always wandering in the 3 worlds of samsara, there is no reason to encourage or remind them. I remind some Dharma students of this balance, saying, please take care of yourselves, don't work too hard. Some respond, dear Guru, you don't have to persuade me to relax. I have no problem relaxing. I am good at 2 things, sleeping and eating. I don't need any advice regarding these 2 things from a master. Nevertheless, as beginning practitioners, if you don't know how to adjust the mind, if you become hasty about studying the Dharma, you want to study this. You don't want to miss that. And especially if you insist on attaining realization when meditating in retreat, you may ruin your health in the end. As a result, you will fall into a vicious circle. You become hastier and more anxious, so your practice is less likely to be successful. Therefore, please do keep this advice in mind. When you get hungry or thirsty during an overly long teaching, or suffer from being exposed to wind, rain, harsh sunlight, and so forth, you should not become discouraged and grow weary of listening to the teaching. Physical conditions for Dharma teachings were very challenging in the past in the Tibetan regions. When I first came to Larungar, although the Dharma hall where I listened to my guru's teachings was very shabby, it still sheltered us from rain and wind. But when my Dharma peers and I gave teachings or received oral transmissions, for almost 10 years we were in the open, exposed to scorching sun and fierce storms. One winter day, in an outdoor yard, I tutored 70 to 80 Tibetan lamas on Pramanavartika, commentary on valid cognition that Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche had just taught us. It often snowed heavily, and the ground we sat on was frozen hard, but all of us could endure the hardships for the sake of pursuing the Dharma. Unlike some of you who bring a cushion to our present better-conditioned Dharma hall, back then we didn't have any cushions. We just sat directly on the frozen ground. We didn't have any cloaks either, so we were covered by snow and literally became snowmen. Sometimes it suddenly blew a gale and the pages in our scripture texts were swept away, so we had to retrieve the pages from everywhere. Such incidents happened often back then. Nevertheless, all of us persevered. Whenever we thought of past eminent masters' austerity and the sacrifices they made in pursuit of the Dharma, we would feel a sense of contentment about our own experience. By comparison, some Buddhists complain it is too tiring to walk to attend the teachings, or it is so challenging to sit on a concrete floor. Alas, they are a bit too picky. Please don't get discouraged when a teaching lasts too long, moaning, "Why are you talking so much? Please dismiss the class and let us go." People who think like this may lack merit. In fact, the longer the teachings, the better. However, many people don't think thus. If the master teaches well, they feel time passes by so quickly, whereas if the master appears to give wordy teachings, they start to complain. Regardless, what the master teaches is Dharma, and Dharma is so rare and precious that however long the teachings are, you shouldn't get tired. Compared to their predecessors, today's Dharma masters don't teach as much, so Dharma students have less access to teachings. Master Chengguan, 738-839, or Qingliang, taught the 80-volume Flower Garland Sutra 50 times in his life, and his teaching lasted 8 hours per day. In comparison, some Dharma teachers now teach only 1 or 2 hours a day, and they feel tired. As you can see, there is a great difference in people's mental strength. Master Dao Xuan, 737-838, or 738-39, taught Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, the 4-part Vinaya, more than 20 times. In the history of Tibetan Buddhism, Lama Tsongkhapa excelled at Dharma teachings. Once he was by a fire with disciples, talking about the stories of eminent masters in the Tibetan plateau and India. Lama Tsongkhapa said, "In the past, the Tibetan master who taught the most in the same period was Katok Dampa Deshek, 1122 to 1192. During one Dharma assembly, he could teach 11 different texts in a single day." Then the disciples earnestly requested Lama Tsongkhapa to do the same thing, teach 11 texts in one Dharma assembly. Persuaded by their sincerity, Lama Tsongkhapa replied, "Maybe I can if I try a bit harder." Lama Tsongkhapa then entered a 20-day retreat, reviewing sutras and shastras. When the retreat was over, he announced that he would teach 15 different texts. Hearing this, the audience was very happy and joined the Dharma assembly from everywhere in the Tibet region. As promised, Lama Tsongkhapa taught 15 texts every day and never skipped one. Back then, the Dharma students were also very persevering. Imagine how you would have felt if you were listening to 15 teachings every day. 2 short texts were finished earlier, so Lama Tsongkhapa replaced them with another 2 texts. So in total, he taught 17 shastras during the Dharma assembly. Later, in another Dharma assembly, Lama Tsongkhapa taught 21 shastras. Many masters in Tibetan Buddhism were truly remarkable in teaching the Dharma. Back then, those Dharma students were not like some of us. Some householders in the Han area recently spent 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon hearing the Dharma, and they whined, "Ah, my butt really hurts. My legs feel like soft jelly," or "My legs are so stiff and hard." Well, I don't know how you define legs as soft or hard. The flesh on the feet is soft, and the bone inside the feet is hard. The feet are as they are. I never understand why the feet get hard during a Dharma teaching. If the householders were asked to watch a 3-hour soap opera instead, I wonder whether they would feel tired at all. Maybe they would want to keep on watching, with eyes wide open. Deeply engrossed in the storyline, they can even skip meals, drinks, and the toilet. They really work hard on this. Today's people are like this. They spend as much time as possible on insignificant things. It is just like a young kid who can spend hours playing outside. But if you ask him to do homework or read books, even just for 1 hour, he complains, "I cannot do it anymore. Can I go outside a bit?" Similarly, ordinary people start to have all sorts of issues when they begin doing something meaningful, including listening to teachings or practicing the Dharma. So please persevere with the Dharma, uphold faith and devotion, and refrain from feeling tired of listening to teachings. You spend 1 out of 24 hours a day listening to Dharma, and you may do other things during the rest of the 23 hours. Many householders living in the city only spend 3 hours per week attending a Dharma class in an afternoon. Given the many hours you have in a whole week, spending 3 hours on the Dharma is not too much. Please stop complaining, saying, "I've listened too long, now I cannot straighten up my back." Alas, does it mean that listening to teachings causes your vertebrae to fuse? Of course, if the teaching goes on too long and you become impatient and really don't want to continue, you can always follow Khenpo Ngawang Pelzang's advice. With regard to getting discouraged when listening to the teachings, if you feel hungry and thirsty during a teaching that goes on too long, or have to put up with discomfort from the sun and rain, and so forth, there is a risk that you will want to leave the Dharma and the teacher. So, before you accumulate the bad karma of giving up the Dharma, you should pray that you will meet the teacher and receive teachings again, and then leave the assembly. This piece of advice is indeed a pith instruction. Listening to teachings is not something imposed by others. It is for our own liberation, so the act of listening embodies great meaning. It is understandable if a householder doesn't understand this, but as a monastic member, since you've chosen the path and forsaken all worldly things, you should be eager to listen to teachings. Nowadays, many householders living in the city choose to study together. I find them wonderful. They are like kids without parents being around, so they gather together saying, "We should study hard and work on our homework." When parents are around, it is nice that kids do schoolwork under supervision. When parents are not around, it is great that kids do schoolwork on their own, without being pushed. Those are great kids. In fact, ordinary beings are just like kids. Without the guru's guidance, they surely won't do anything meaningful on their own. That said, many Buddhists are already doing great. I hope that they will keep up the good work and won't feel that's enough after listening to teachings once or twice. To succeed in doing worldly things, it's not enough to do it once or twice, let alone your Dharma practice. Therefore, you must always reinforce and devote yourself to your Dharma study and practice. If you are discouraged, please do not give up on the teaching. Instead, you should remind yourself, now that I have the freedoms and advantages of human life, and that I was not reborn in a lower realm as a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal in this life, and that I have met a qualified spiritual teacher and can listen to their profound teachings, this is the fruit of merits accumulated over countless kalpas. I must appreciate the opportunity as much as possible. What are the qualifications of an authentic teacher? There are many characteristics involved, but in a nutshell, the Gelugpa lineage considers the most essential characteristic as renouncing this life. For Kadampas, it is upholding pure precepts for both Sutrayana and Vajrayana masters, and for Nyingmapas, it is having bodhicitta, as advocated by lineage masters such as Patrul Rinpoche. In The Great Chariot, a treatise on the Great Perfection, Longchenpa particularly mentioned that a Vajra guru must have 8 characteristics, such as being well-versed in tantras, having perfected the mantra practice, having signs of approach and accomplishment, and so on. Moreover, Longchenpa adopted his guru Rigdzin Kumaradza's viewpoint and added one more characteristic, having pure lineage transmission. Of course, it is hard in the degenerate age to find a teacher having all the above-mentioned characteristics. Therefore, as long as the teacher is well-versed and compassionate, they can be considered a qualified teacher. It is very fortunate to follow such a teacher. I often think, I am so fortunate to have met Jigme Phuntsok in this short life. It is really the fruit of merits accumulated over thousands of millions of kalpas. Nowadays, many practitioners go astray. Due to their lack of wisdom, they are complacent when meeting a charlatan teacher and show off their luck of having encountered a teacher to everyone. They don't know that some of those charlatans are just heretics. Anything can happen in this degenerate age. Therefore, it is so very precious for us to have received the profound teachings that perfectly integrate Sutrayana and Vajrayana from Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, who is a great enlightened master comparable to the Buddha, and who carries the clear, pure, and unstained legacy of the lineage. We shouldn't have even the slightest doubt about this. It is truly a blessing that we have met Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche's teachings in this chaotic era. This is a great merit in itself, and we should feel so blissful. Some householders are very clear that it is a great and rare opportunity that we can practice the Dharma while listening to teachings. It is such an auspicious cause and condition. Yesterday, I met a Dharma practitioner who used to stay in monasteries that either mainly practice takuhatsu, an ascetic practice, or that focus on recitations. This practitioner later came to Larungar and realized that it is hard to practice the Dharma without having heard the teachings. According to him, when practicing takuhatsu, it is wholesome to follow the disciplines, such as eating once a day before noon. After all, upholding pure precepts is the foundation of all merits. However, even when his behavior was impeccable, he remained entangled by his defilements. Then he went to a monastery focusing on recitations. Since there were few chances for hearing and contemplation, so many teachings remained unclear to him. Every day he just sat there, reciting mantras. Therefore, he was still entangled and his afflictions were still there. Later, he came to Larungar and had the opportunity to study the Dharma thoroughly and to practice properly. I am not trying to praise Larungar and belittle other monasteries, but after following Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche for years, many of us learned how to study Buddhism properly. First, we must find a qualified teacher who has mastered the entire meaning of Sutrayana and Vajrayana. Then we follow a sequential order of practice, starting from hearing and contemplation, and then advancing to meditation. Meanwhile, we uphold precepts, which play a fundamental role in our practice. By doing all of these, we'll perfect our Dharma practice. It is not just a random happenstance that we encounter such supreme Dharma in this life. As said in the Mahayana texts, such as Condensed Transcendent Wisdom, the reason we can listen to the profound Dharma now is due to the merit accumulated over innumerable kalpas. Some people think it is totally by chance that I took my ordination. I had a fight with my family, which made me become a monk. Or, I study Buddhism because of the influence of my partner or my friend. Or, I came to Larungar for no particular reason. Actually, the reasons they mentioned are just secondary causes. The substantial causes are that they established an affinity with Mahayana Buddhism in previous lives and accomplished virtuous deeds in the presence of innumerable gurus and Buddhas. When you listen to my teachings on condensed transcendent wisdom, you will learn that just to hear teachings and to hold the texts in your hands, you need causes and conditions from previous lives. Otherwise, you may not hear even if you listen, you may not hold even if you reach out, and you may not see even if you look. This is the law of karma, which was taught by the Buddha himself, not fabricated by our conceptual minds. It is indeed very rare to hear the Dharma. As said in the Adbhuta Dharmparya Sutra, Sutra on the Buddha, speaking of unprecedented causes and conditions, it is hard to encounter the kalpa where Buddhas are born. It is hard to hear the Dharma teachings. It is hard to retain one's life. It is hard to succeed in the path. Being able to hear such profound teachings now is truly like having a meal once in 100 hours. It is a rare and joyful opportunity that comes once in 1,000 years. Therefore, one should listen with the utmost diligence and joy. Each of us has a different affinity with Dharma. Some people, such as the great Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, spend their whole life studying Dharma. According to his biography, from when he was 5 or 6 years old until his parinirvana, when he was in his 70s, Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche never departed from the Dharma, not even during the decade of upheaval amidst the Cultural Revolution. In comparison, how many teachings have you attended in this life? Each of you can reflect on this. As for me, now I am in my 40s. Although I have had the great merit of following my peerless guru, the great Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, for over 20 years, it is hard to say what I will become in the future. I spent most of my youth herding yaks and attending schools, so I hadn't focused much on the Dharma before my ordination. I've heard teachings given by my guru, many of which were my first time hearing them, as well as my last time. Many of you might have had the same experience, so whenever you can listen to teachings, please do appreciate the opportunity as much as you can. Nowadays, when some people follow a teacher, they prefer to choose someone famous. It is fine with them, even if the teacher has no great qualities. This is not right. You should first examine the teacher and follow them if they are qualified. After following the teacher, you should have great faith in the teacher and in the Dharma, and you should refrain from examining the teacher with your conceptual minds. Specifically, you should act according to the Dharma and listen to the teacher's teachings with great respect. It is imperative that you endure all hardships and difficulties and listen to the precious Dharma with great joy. Some people encounter a lot of pressure and have to face many situations when listening to teachings. Make sure you practice patience and perseverance. Most importantly, you should have joy towards the Dharma. As said in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, a person's state of mind is very important. When a person is very interested in something, they will joyfully go even if they need to travel a few hundred yojanas. When a person has no interest in something, even if it is within earshot range, they will find the journey exhausting. When you are motivated by joy, even if you are asked to destroy Mount Sumeru, you will feel that the mission is possible because Mount Sumeru is a conditioned phenomenon, and conditioned phenomena can be destroyed. With such diligence and perseverance, it won't take too long for you to attain supreme enlightenment, as the Buddha did. Therefore, when discussing diligence, the Prajnaparamita Sutras especially emphasize the importance of one's mental strength. Indeed, when we really want to see a friend, even if that friend lives very far away, we won't mind walking there if time permits, and we won't feel too tired. Whereas when we have to see a foe or someone we dislike, we will become very weary, even if that person lives close by. The power of the mind is incredible, so whichever text you are listening to, make sure you have joy about the Dharma and think, listening to teachings brings great merit. Now that I have this supreme and precious opportunity, I shall listen to the teachings by all means. You shouldn't be like some Dharma students who always bargain with the person in charge of the group study, asking, can I skip today's study? My friend is sick. Or can I not attend the teaching today? I don't feel very well. Or may I not come today? My work is a bit overwhelming. Or may I take a leave of absence? My mother is not feeling well. Or may I skip today's teaching? I'll go sightseeing with friends. These are not necessarily legitimate reasons. If you prioritize Dharma teachings, you won't be absent at all. Once in Beijing, I met a civil servant who told me, my job as a government worker can sometimes be challenging to my practice. There are many strict rules at work. Nevertheless, since I really want to study Dharma, I can maneuver around the challenges. For example, I sometimes can tell white lies if necessary. Anyway, since I started to join the group studies, I've never skipped a single Dharma class. It is the same for me. I give teachings every day. If I hadn't spared time for teaching, then I would have been busy doing something else. Our conceptual thoughts arise unceasingly. Today is this thing, and tomorrow that thing. In the end, I couldn't have completed any teaching. Therefore, I try to rank all my mandates and give top priority to my teaching. Thus, except on very rare occasions, I hardly ever skip teaching. By so doing, I always have time to give Dharma teachings. This principle also applies to your listening to the Dharma. If you consider it the most important thing in your life, then certainly you can spare time for it. Even if you are very sick and have to take intravenous therapy, you can bring the infusion bottle to class so you can listen to teachings while receiving treatment. It can be an easy decision to make. Each of you should boost your mental strength. Otherwise, if you consider listening to Dharma a pressure or a burden, you may not get much out of the Dharma, and your behavior may not be appropriate. Therefore, don't get weary when listening to teachings. You should feel joyful instead. In my home monastery, there is a great master, Tulku Detsa, who always has indescribable joy toward the Dharma. I shared his stories with a few Dharma friends yesterday. Tulku Detsa is a renowned practitioner in the region of Luhuo. Before I took my ordination, once I had the opportunity to meet him, I noticed he showed no interest in fame and wealth, and that the only thing he appreciated was listening to teachings. Back then, the government's policy on religion was still very strict, so nobody dared to study Dharma. If one person taught the Dharma to another, both would be imprisoned. Despite this, Tulku Detsa still managed to listen to teachings on Vinaya from a Geshe in a Gelugpa monastery. When he returned from the teachings, he would sometimes have visitors at his home. When the visitors spoke to him, he appeared mindless because his mind was focused on the teachings he had just received. At that time, I didn't realize the integrity of Tulku Detsa's behavior. I thought all practitioners were like him. However, as I encounter more and more people, I admire his courage and devotion more and more. Imagine if we were living during the turbulent years Tulku Detsa was in, could we have had the courage to pursue the Dharma like he did? I am afraid not. Even if we had listened to the teachings, we might not have listened with joy. To summarize, make sure you listen with joy. From tomorrow, I hope everyone will joyfully listen to teachings and feel great gratitude towards the teacher and the teaching. Otherwise, some people may think, the Dharma teacher is so annoying. Listening to teachings is so challenging. How comfortable it is to stay home sleeping. This is the most pleasant thing in life, but I cannot fulfill this wish. Can I give some money for mantra recitation to get blessings so that I can skip the Dharma classes and have my unfavorable conditions dispelled? Such thoughts are very bad. Make sure you don't have these thoughts and you listen to teachings with joy.